So we are continuing on with the manual for teachers. Before we go into our new material that has to do with magic thoughts, I wanted to step back a paragraph from the previous section and examine what it had to do because it ended on a note having to do with magic thoughts. So we'll do that and then we'll get into our new material. Letitia?
No risk is possible throughout the day except to put your trust in magic, for it is only this that leads to pain. There is no will but God's. His teachers know that this is so and have learned that everything but this is magic. All belief in magic is maintained by just one simple-minded illusion that it works. All through his training, every day and every hour, and even every minute and second, must God's teachers learn to recognize the forms of magic and perceive their meaninglessness. Fear is withdrawn from them, and so they go. And thus the gate of heaven is reopened, and its light can shine again on an untroubled mind.
Mhm. So there is God's plan for creation for love and peace and joy. And then in contrast, there's an alternative plan that we'll call magic. That is for us to do it our way, for us to have it our own way. Let my ego contrive a plan that might bring about something worthwhile. Uh, that would be one way of looking at magic. And therefore, and that belief is maintained by the idea of thinking that our plan will work, that it's worthwhile. Therefore, the teacher of God must learn that magic to recognize, meaning to become aware of and identify various forms of magic and perceive that they're not sins, they're not evil. What it is, they're just meaningless mistakes. Not to judge against the magic, but to realize of its inability, the inability of the ego to bring about happiness. So, with that as a background, welcome to Miracles on High Plains. My name is Jonica, and our reader today is Atisha B. We will be reading about how God's teachers deal with others when they encounter others who are deeply invested in magical thoughts and magical beliefs. What is the teacher of God to do upon encountering others who are just rock solid, determined to believe in their magical thoughts? And with that, we'll go on.
How do God's teachers deal with magic thoughts? This is a crucial question for both teacher and pupil. If this issue is mishandled, the teacher of God has hurt himself and has also attacked his pupil. This strengthens fear and makes the magic seem quite real to both of them. How to deal with magic thus becomes a major lesson for the teacher of God to master. His first responsibility in this is not to attack it. If a magic thought arouses anger in any form, God's teacher can be sure that he is strengthening his own belief in sin and has condemned himself. He can be sure as well that he has asked for depression, pain, fear, and disaster to come to him. Let him remember then, it is not this that he would teach, because it is not this that he would learn.
So there's a slightly veiled warning here to teachers of Course in Miracles, God's teachers, about this issue. If it's mishandled, you'll hurt yourself and at the same time project hurt out towards the pupil in the form of judgment, projecting judgments outward. And then in so judging another, one actually reinforces the power of judgment in your own mind. And thus makes the magic seem quite real. Now, before we go on, as a footnote to this, while this section deals with another person who believes in magic plans, magic thoughts, magic laws, it can also, it seems to me, be applied to anyone who's mistaken with regards to their illusions and their fears. The same approach can be applied to any illusion that another person has when you're attempting to be helpful there. So the first thing would be is to recognize that this is a major lesson for the teacher of God to master. And as always, his first responsibility is not to be in opposition to the other person, not to attack them, not to fault them for having believed in an illusion or believed in magic, not to debase them for what they don't know or don't understand, not to belittle them in one's own mind, because by doing that, you are immediately attacking them as well as yourself. And you will strengthen your own belief in sin and condemn yourself. And then ask for all the feelings that come along with self-condemnation, such as depression, pain, fear, and disaster. So we're in a territory that has confused many. I have witnessed this, how should we say, I've witnessed what this looks like when it does not turn out well, from a teacher who uses mistaken beliefs of someone else and then weaponizes that opportunity to put them in their place and make it clear that they're wrong. And that is not what Course in Miracles is seeking to perpetuate. So, caution going in, this must be, it's a major lesson for the teacher of God to master. We'll take questions in a moment.
There is, however, a temptation to respond to magic in a way that reinforces it. Nor is this always obvious. It can, in fact, be easily concealed beneath a wish to help. It is this double wish that makes the help of little value and must lead to undesired outcomes. Nor should it be forgotten that the outcomes that results will always come to teacher and to pupil alike. How many times has it been emphasized that you give but to yourself? Mm-hmm. And where could this be better shown than in the kinds of help the teacher of God gives to those who need his aid? Here is his gift most clearly given him. For he will give only what he has chosen for himself. And in this gift is his judgment upon the Holy Son of God.
Mm-hmm. So here we're talking about what I might call the intermediate case, where one's judgment of the other is concealed, hidden. The judgment is hidden beneath a wish to help. So if you believe someone is less than you, but you're here to help their poor self up, that is still a form of a double wish that makes the help of little value and leads to undesired outcomes. And so it's the very, whether spoken or unspoken, it's the way we regard others in our mind. What judgment, if any, has our mind made towards another person, even if we attempt to conceal that judgment to everyone else, the effect is still there. You should not forget that the outcome that comes about of this will always come to both teacher and pupil alike. This is the law of giving and receiving, that what you believe to be true of yourself, you believe to be true of everybody else, and then you have the effects that come about as a result of that belief. He will only give what he has chosen for himself. All right, let's take some comments. Sandra, you've been patient with your hand up. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Yeah, could you how does this all pertain to self? Because I keep coming up with healthy boundaries and being able to set them in a gentle, kind way so that there can be a dialogue.
Mhm.
Um, and I this is where the challenge is for me is
Yeah.
how to set those healthy boundaries because maybe somebody's behavior, maybe they didn't keep their word or something like that.
Yes.
Um, and that happens again and again. So can you comment on that? How to do that?
Yeah. That definitely comes into play here. A sense of boundaries, which I can redefine for the teacher of God, is um, what is my part in being helpful here, and what is not my part in being helpful here. A sense of boundaries. Um, I believe that as we get further into the reading, here, Sandra, that will become more clear. So I'd like to postpone addressing that for the moment. And then when the reading brings it to the forefront, let's talk about it then. So, but remind me, don't let me forget. Uh, Atisha?
Yeah, Jonica, I'm just wondering if you could give some examples of magical thinking. Two things come to mind for me. One is that I grew up in a church that believed in the rapture.
Mhm.
And so I'm wondering if that would be considered magic thinking. And also, for someone, let's say, who ruminates and regrets, it's almost like they're sort of stuck in this mental loop of maybe trying to change the past. Are those considered magic thinking?
So, whenever you asked a question about specific cases. Honestly, immediately I don't know, but I can tell you in the broad abstract sense what magic is, and then we can try to work our way back to figure out if any specific case, because really the Holy Spirit is the judge of these things. And I may not have clarity of that voice in this very moment. But I can tell you that there are two categories. One is the laws and plans as God intended them. That would be the laws of creation, the laws of love, the laws of forgiveness and peace, how all that works, how for the good of everybody. Those principles, those values, and what they mean to bring about a happy life. And then there's everything that doesn't follow those principles, that seeks to derive meaning and values through some other mechanism, whatever it might be. Generally, in this context, we talk about ego guidance and the laws of the ego, the religions of the ego. And those characteristics always have certain feelings attached to them, certain results. We just read in the previous paragraph about depression, anger, and pain that come about as a result of trying to apply the ego's laws. So now, Atisha, regarding the specifics of people believing in the rapture, let me take a whack at it. I'm not sure because I hadn't thought about it ahead of time. But I believe that the rapture says that the faithful will be resurrected, but those who are not will suffer consequences and remain. For in other words, it's like a separating out of the ones that the God supposedly chose and believers from the unbelievers. Nod your head if that rings a bell. So we would say right there that violates the fundamental principle of God's love being universal and towards all, that we're not going to, that would be preferential. Here we go. God is no respecter of persons would be one way of understanding the laws of love. And this would be, the rapture would be preferential treatment for those who have paid their dues, so in air quotes. So yeah, I would say that falls into the really questionable domain. Magic thoughts, sure. And then I'm sorry, but I forgot the other example that you mentioned. But all of this is really what I'm doing here is taking an abstract principle and then seeking to use spiritual reason and spiritual logic to see how it would apply in the specific case. And that's effort to apply it to the specific case is an interpretation on my part. I'm not saying that's God's plan, the laws, but this is what we have. Decisions must be made. We have to decide what we're going to believe in and not believe in, what directions we're going to go. And so in a world of time and space, we have to make these kind of interpretations. I hope that helps. Julie?
Thank you so much. I was thinking, and I know that this is a course and that, our goal is not to bring in other teachings and compare and contrast. And so I hope that I don't violate that value by offering this. I didn't really understand where we were going with magical thinking a couple of weeks ago when it first came up. Because it's a new way of the course talking about something that I think it has actually talked about before. And how I went to it was, oh, okay, so magical thinking is the same thing as the illusion, in quotes. And for me, how I took it was, oh, so this is the difference between self-will and God's will for me.
Yes.
For example, so anytime through prayer, meditation, reference to the book, conversation maybe with another teacher of miracles, and there's a parallel 12-step thing here that I'm not getting into. Anytime I know or can begin to believe that my decision or my perception is based on self-will versus, for example, practicing the third step, which talks about turning over will and life to the care of a power greater than ourselves. That's how I figured it out for me just yesterday. I thought, oh, okay, well, this is how I'll know. I'll substitute magical thinking for self-will.
Mhm.
And that was just my way of trying to apply it.
That works. That works. And other ways of understanding it, other approaches can work as well. Thank you, all of you who are asking these questions, because I have a slide that I was going to save until the end of the session. But based on your feedback, we're going to bring it up now. And so this is a concoction of my own that summarizes and that contrasts in the left column how believing in magic, the illusions of magical powers would look, and in contrasting that in the right-hand column with how it would be in according to Course in Miracles concept of the laws of truth. So in magical powers, we believe that the ability to bring about creative endeavors exists somehow in the physical realm, that it's hard to interpret, but it believes that initiative and guidance comes from the ego domain, that's where it originates. Whereas in truth, we recognize that creative power comes from the source, a power greater than ourselves, I think were the words that Julie just used. In magic, there believes that some people have a special gift to bring about healing, that these are uniquely gifted people with healing powers, whereas in the universal plan of God, everyone has the ability to heal. There are no preferential team members, no respecters of person. In magic, it's what do we rely on? It's Julie mentioned this. It's self-will, a reliance on little self to guide and direct, whereas in truth, we rely on spirit to guide us, true assistance. In magic, it's centered upon a concept of the self that is centered in the body and that believes in separation and sacrifice and feels fearful. Whereas in truth, we realize that that was a mistake, that I am not a body, my mind is a part of God's, that fear is unwelcome here. In magic, we believe in the illusion and trust that if we just come up with a right magical formula, that we can achieve magical outcomes, whereas in truth, we trust in God's plan for creation. In magic, we believe these illusions are sustained by our believing that they work, that that's where the power lies. Whereas the miracle worker recognizes many forms of magic and perceives that they are nothing, they are but ego illusions, and therefore they need not be feared, and we withdraw fear. So this is not this is an imperfect rendering, but it starts to give you an idea of how these two different perceptual systems operate. And I realized that it's been a while since this topic of magic came up in the textbook. So this does seem a little out of context here. So we'll continue to elaborate as we go on here. Susie?
There's a really important part of the text that I remember that talks about magic. And it says that what talks about medicine.
Yes.
And it says, let's say, I'll just give an example. You don't think that you can fall asleep without something. And it says, it doesn't give that example or whatever, but it says specifically, I remember, not to judge yourself. And if you believe you need the magic, take it until you know otherwise.
Mhm.
And I just think was really important because, again, it tells us to be gentle with ourselves and not to judge ourselves, and with things like that. And I just wanted to mention that because I remember it vividly reading it.
Mhm.
So anyway, that's it. I know that when thoughts are corrected, some of that magical thinking or magical beliefs start to get reversed,
Yes.
get changed, get corrected, and so yeah, I just wanted to
Mhm.
just mention the whole thing about just being gentle with ourselves and not to judge ourselves for anything magical. And when we're ready, we're ready.
Yeah. For hundreds of years, science has recognized the placebo effect, that in an experiment where you're giving out, let's say, pills to patients, this is a controlled experiment, they give to one half of patients, they give the actual medication that's being evaluated, and to the other patients, they give a sugar pill. And the patients don't know. And they find that many of the patients that receive the sugar pill also heal and do very well. And Heather used this in her practice. I'm going to tell on her here. She used this, and she said that when she would give a patient a prescription, she'd always say, "Take this, you will get better." And because the instruction, the belief, we're talking about belief systems now, the patient walks out saying, "Oh, I'm on my way to getting better." Well, those effects are hard to measure scientifically, but they have statistically measured them in many of these experiments and found that, oh yes, many of the people taking sugar pills got better as well. So to Susie's point, yes, if you're believing in magic, there's still, be gentle on yourself. Don't be self-judgmental about it. Just the belief that you're on healing and getting better has a major impact. Noelle?
Yes, I was going to mention the placebo effect too. And based on what both you and Susie said, I realize how powerful our minds are. There have also been experiments where people took on heart attacks and other horrible things because of the suggestions of others, because they believed in a certain fear or whatever it was under the conditions. So our minds are really powerful. And to me, that's why I have to keep guarding against the magic stuff. And that slide of yours is very, very, very helpful to keep reminders.
Yes. Okay, well, thank you all for that feedback. Let's go on.
It is easiest to let error be corrected where it is most apparent, and errors can be recognized by their results. A lesson truly taught can lead to nothing but release for teacher and pupil who have shared in one intent. Attack can enter only if perception of separate goals has entered. And this must indeed have been the case if the result is anything but joy. The single aim of the teacher turns the divided goal of the pupil into one direction, with the call for help becoming his one appeal. This then is easily responded to with just one answer, and this answer will enter the teacher's mind unfailingly. From there, it shines into his pupil's mind, making it one with his.
So we should remember, or the question, how does healing work? When someone is confused and has lost hope and is feeling despair, pain, how can that person then change and heal? Well, it's referred to right here, and this ultimately is the role of the teacher of God, is to help in the healing process. Not that they're the source of the healing, but that they are the eyes and the ears, the voice that can contribute towards the healing. And the single aim of the teacher is to turn the torn, conflicted mind of the pupil into one direction. It's a change of mind, with the call for help being his one appeal. So we're talking about where there's a call for help in any form from the client, and then the teacher responds to that, not with judgment about their condition, not with belittlement that they're mistaken and wrong, but that someone has called for help. And as a teacher of God, I'm here and I'm willing to help. How can I be of help here? No judgment needed there. Then it's easily responded to with the same. This is where the Course of Miracles is amazing. It's always the same answer. Despite the fact that the symptoms, Tisha talked about the rapture. People believe in the rapture. There's people that believe that they're unlovable. There's people that believe the world's going to come to an. All the symptoms come out in many different descriptions. But the Course has a simplified way of looking at how those symptoms are cured, because there is always just one answer. And it's vital that the teacher keep that answer in mind and not get all wrapped up in the appearance of the symptoms, the form of the illness. Otherwise, you wind up attempting to come up with a unique solution that you have to invent in the moment for those individuals needing help. And that's usually where little self-will gets involved. I'm going to come up with some kind of clever response here. And so what is that one answer? Is the right question to ask? I don't see it mentioned on this page explicitly. Maybe it's on the next page. And when the teacher keeps that one answer in his mind, because the minds have joined for a common purpose, you're there to be helpful for the person, not to judge them, but to join with them together, because we heal together or not at all. Then that answer shines in the mind of his pupil, making it one with his. That sounds like spiritual laws that are not well understood. When the help has been called for and one responds, the Holy Spirit, I'm going to use a word here, enshrouds that moment there with a opportunity for healing. And it is vital that the teacher of God be in awareness of themselves and who they are and how healing operates. And by keeping that in their mind, they can then share that insight. Insight is a really wonderful world. It's insight into the spirit, it's sight into the spiritual realm. It's an inner vision of what healing is. We're referring to the one answer that will enter the teacher's mind unfailingly. So it's natural then, if you followed what we're talking about up till now, you might say, well, what answer are we talking about? What specifically? Well, if you think about it, we've been talking about that all along, but maybe it will spell it out and more explicitly as we go on.
Perhaps it will be helpful to remember that no one can be angry at a fact. It is always an interpretation that gives rise to negative emotions, regardless of their seeming justification by what appears as facts. Regardless, too, of the intensity of the anger that is aroused. It may be merely slight irritation, perhaps too mild to be even clearly recognized. Or it may also take the form of intense rage, accompanied by thoughts of violence, fantasized or apparently acted out. It does not matter. All of these reactions are the same. They obscure the truth, and this can never be a matter of degree. Either truth is apparent or it is not. It cannot be partially recognized. Who is unaware of truth must look upon illusions.
So we said a moment ago that there's one answer and that it is vital that the teacher keep that one answer in mind. But what happens if they don't? Well, if they don't, if truth is only partially recognized, then illusions rush in to fill the vacuum. And what does that look like? That looks like anger, but let's use some other words. Impatience. It can look like disdain, can look like shutting the person out. You can hold me to this criteria if you wish. When let me speak in another context here. I've observed Eckhart Tolle. He has all these conferences and they record things on tape and everything. So there's a lot of material out there. And many times he'll talk about something for 20 minutes and then a person in the audience will ask a question as if he had not said anything at all. They'll just ask the same question all over again. And so it might appear on one level that they didn't hear anything he said. And he is always very patient and kind with them. He uses, is, in my view, very effective at using any question as an opportunity to teach everybody. No matter if the question asks question of what had already been said previously, he uses it as an opportunity. So he does not respond with anger, disdain, or dismissive, or a slight irritation, perhaps too mild to be easily recognized. He always, well, in my observations, he uses that moment as a teaching moment so that it winds up being a victory. Because that's what he's there for, is to teach. And so he keeps, I would say, keeps that one answer in mind. I'm here to be helpful. Holy Spirit has got the formula for doing the healing. I have an essential part to play in God's plans for salvation, but let me not forget what my part is. And it's not to have emotional reactions or to judge the question that somebody may have. It's to be helpful. Um, so either the truth is apparent in your mind or it's not. It cannot be partially recognized. And so, what we're really, this is advice for the teachers of God to not lose their sense of purpose of why they're here. Let me take this moment to circle back with Sandra's question about boundaries. And I'm not sure what I'm about to say, so be patient with me, please. I think in the broadest sense that the teacher of God would prefer to leave the details of where the boundaries fall to be decided by the listeners in the specific situation which they fall. For in other words, the preference would be to affirm the universal principles that are applicable to all people at all times, knowing that the specific details of what should be done in any instance cannot be predetermined in advance and apart from the situation, that the individuals involved have to work those details out. So yes, boundaries must be set, but they can't be set in an abstract sense in advance and apart from the actual situation to which they're in. So for that reason, we don't teach a set of rules. When this happens, do this, don't do that. We do focus on is justice and peace and honor and respect, are they being acknowledged? And if they are, then yes, you still have to figure out where the boundary lies, but there's no fixed answer to that. So let me give one more example here that happened to me a few hours ago. So I'm working with someone who is running their own business. And for the very first time next year, we'll be paying a salary to another employee. They've never had to pay a salary to an employee before. It never had employees, but the business is growing. And the question is how much to pay. And that's a boundary. Do we, if the business is making $35,000 a year, or do we pay a third of that to this person that's working part-time? And here's what I came up with. The principles from miracles are to honor and respect the contribution of the person, realize that their part is vital and we respect them, that we want to be fair in all these matters. But in the working out of the details, we have to figure those things out ourselves. And so we did come up with a set of compensation solution, but it's not a universal answer. It's an answer that had to be uniquely contrived given the parameters of this one situation. in a different situation, all different factors would be considered. And so boundaries, therefore, can be taught in principle, but the application of them to specific life has to be done on a very specific basis. Sandra?
Yeah, the first place that I usually go is to the Holy Spirit before I set a boundary. Because if I feel the need to set a boundary, I'm certainly judging on some level. So yeah, so I bring it to the Holy Spirit. I ask to be shown the truth, and then I wait for guidance about how to set the boundary, or even to set the boundary. Sometimes it's just removing myself from a situation. That's the boundary, is to just remove myself. If I'm not feeling respected or, you know, thought of, then I can just remove myself until I'm ready to either set the boundary or go back into the situation and not care.
Yeah, and this illustrates another complexity with boundaries, because there's boundaries in the a world of unsafety, children playing at a playground, danger nearby, someone with a weapon. That's one set of boundaries. Another one would be healthy boundaries, like we want to reward our employees with a reasonable compensation package. Only good is intended. So there's just such a wide range there. This is why we focus on the principles that are in effect. We'll go on.
Anger in response to perceived magic thoughts is a basic cause of fear. Consider what this reaction means, and its centrality in the world's thought system becomes apparent. A magic thought, by its mere presence, acknowledges a separation from God. It states in the clearest form possible that the mind which believes it has a separate will that can oppose the will of God also believes it can succeed. That this can hardly be a fact is obvious, yet that it can be believed as fact is equally obvious. And herein lies the birthplace of guilt. Who usurps the place of God and takes it for himself now has a deadly enemy, and he must stand alone in his protection and make himself a shield to keep him safe from fury that can never be abated and vengeance that can never be satisfied.
So earlier, Julie expressed her understanding of magic is contrasting between little self-will versus doing God's will. I'm simplifying that. And this really affirms that point of view because in the clearest possible form, magic is a belief that, there might be God's will, but I got my own will. And I'm going to go my own separate way. I'm going to defy or challenge the will of God as not being either adequate or believable. I'm going to oppose it and believe that I can succeed on my own. This is little self-will. Yes, so there we go. And with that was where the separation began. This is what perpetuates the separation, is believing God's will not enough. We need more than that. There's that joke, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your own plan. We need to supplement God's plan, that it's not adequate. And with that is the beginning of separation, which is the birthplace of guilt. which is to replace God's will and take your own will instead, immediately that creates opposition with the will of God. It creates an enemy, and this is the origin of the fear of God. Now, playing the ego's role. Now that I'm running on my own little self will, which is in opposed to God. I've made an enemy of God, and oh my goodness, that means my relationship to God is one of fear because we're all on entirely different agendas. And total insanity. What is the result of all that? An insane thought system that devalues or denies the will of God and attempts to go in a separate direction. So, how did we get there from magic thoughts? Well, a magic thought, believing in magic thoughts and amplifying them by its mere presence, acknowledges a belief that God's plan for creation is not, whether done consciously, many times this is done unconsciously. So we should acknowledge that. But it's a belief that another set of rules are needed to guide us and to bring about happiness. In the clearest possible form, it believes that you can oppose the will of God. So magic thoughts are a form of acting out the separate belief in separation. The feelings that come with that this is the birthplace of guilt, and immediately come from a belief that God is our opposition, and therefore fear rushes in. I'm opposed to God. What could be more frightening than to take on God as an enemy? Sandra?
Something that's helped me a lot is to admit that I don't understand salvation's ways.
Yes.
And that helps me a lot.
Yes. Yes. This is the whole, thank you for acknowledging that, because it's a major step in everybody's progress. This is the whole meaning of forgiveness is, and Sandra didn't say this, I'm not speaking about her, I'm speaking about us, is I think I know what salvation is. I've made a judgment that salvation means blah, 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 and then I fill in the words. Forgiveness is the process of laying that judgment down and saying, I don't know. I'm going to let go and undo that fixed position in my mind. And rather than remain, here's point is key, rather than permanently remain in a state of confusion, because now I said I don't know, now I'm going to turn to Holy Spirit and let Spirit teach me her version of salvation that will take the place of the view that I arrived at on my own. All forgiveness has this form: letting go your initial judgments and letting the mind of the Holy Spirit guide us instead. It's really, we used to think forgiveness was about someone done me wrong, but I'm going to forgive them anyway. Well, that's one way to encounter it, but a deeper psychological way of understanding it is I formulated by myself independently, using my ego as guide, a judgment about life, about myself, about others, about the meaning of love, the meaning of salvation. I formulated something independent in not consulting God at all. And forgiveness is that I'm willing to acknowledge that I didn't really know what I was talking about, and I let it go so that I might be taught instead by Holy Spirit.
How can this unfair battle be resolved? Its ending is inevitable, for its outcome must be death. How then can one believe in one's defenses? Magic again must help. Forget the battle. Accept it as a fact and then forget it. Do not remember the impossible odds against you. Do not remember the immensity of the enemy, and do not think about your frailty in comparison. Accept your separation, but do not remember how it came about. Believe that you have won it, but do not retain the slightest memory of who your great opponent really is. Projecting your forgetting onto him, it seems to you he has forgotten too.
You might ask, why did I highlight that text in color? Well, it was purposeful. It has a meaning that I seek to convey regularly, is because everything that was said there was the ego's point of view. Everything was said there. This is the message that subconsciously and sometimes consciously will break through in the conscious mind that the ego would have, which is, don't remember the immensity of making God as an enemy by asserting your own plan in comparison. Learn to live with your separation, but forget how it came about. Believe your ego can win, and don't retain the slightest memory of who it is that you're opposing. Project your forgetting outward, and you'll believe that God has forgotten you as well. That's the religion of the ego. And often I highlight these things because people, when I first read the Course in Miracles, I didn't know this. I thought they were talking truth. I didn't understand what should be obvious here, that this is not the guidance from Holy Spirit, that this is ego guidance.
But what will now be your reaction to all magic thoughts? They can but reawaken sleeping guilt, which you have hidden but have not let go. Each one says clearly to your frightened mind, you have usurped the place of God. Think not he has forgotten. Here we have the fear of God most starkly represented. For in that thought has guilt already raised madness to the throne of God himself. And now there is no hope except to kill. Here is salvation now. An angry father pursues his guilty son, kill or be killed, for here alone is choice. Beyond this there is none, for what was done cannot be done without. The stain of blood can never be removed, and anyone who bears this stain on him must meet with death.
So let's just, in all this messaging here, recount how we got here, because we were starting out with teacher of God encounters someone who believes in magic, and then for a moment becomes upset with them for believing in magic, and thus enters into an adversarial role with them rather than joining. And this then becomes a replay of the separation where guilt was born. Because now, rather than joining with the person and recognizing them as another version of your true self, you now see them as separate from you. And then all this, actually, I want to credit Tisha. She uses the word an ego storm then arise. It's a storm of, it's not just one or two thoughts, it's an entire storm system that arrives along with this belief in separation, the guilt that comes with it, the belief that I've got a better plan than God, therefore God is my enemy. I've usurped the place of God. And the entire thought system, which the ego would have you believe in, is evoked. And so it is a storm. I think that is a term that is useful. And it takes mind training, first of all, to recognize, oh my goodness, I'm being overwhelmed by all these thoughts, and they are nasty. I would never say this to someone that I love. How I've heard many people. This is where I think it was either Sandra or Susie tonight said, you got to be gentle with yourself when these things happen, and not start attacking yourself. Just realize that you're in an ego storm and that it's being initiated by thoughts that are normally kept in your subconscious, but have now been triggered by this individual who's believing in magic thoughts, and then your judgment of them as not being worthy of your love or somehow being less than worthy of your love. And this storm then begins. So, first suggestion is cut it off at the pass before it gets big. Recognize it as quickly as possible so that you might let it go and pause, ask for help for the Holy Spirit. This is not what I'm here for. It's to entertain these illusions as quickly as possible. Pause and do a restorative. But if you should find yourself in the midst of a storm, which these words here represent, then it's necessary really to take a time out. We do not suggest you proceed. It's what is it? Halt is the advice. Is halt, take a time out. Before we go on, let me just say that what we're talking about is a reaction to magic thoughts. What then happens when we react that way? It reawakens the sleeping guilt in your own unconscious mind. It reawakens that part of your mind that still gives entertainment and power and belief to the ego. And so what then pours forth is the shadows of your own unconscious mind. It seems, or people would like to believe, that the person that they're directing all this towards is the source of the issue. But we have learned how the laws of perception work. They really are a statement of what you believe to be true of your own ego. It's your own frightened mind expressing itself. Whether you say these things or with words or just think and feel them on your own matters not. It's this reawakening. And that's where the key point here, This is where the real healing needs to happen. The level it needs to happen at is to heal the sleeping guilt which you have hidden but have not let go. How does real healing, how will the world heal? By each individual ridding themselves, becoming conscious, first of all, of recognize the problem so it can be solved, conscious of the sleeping guilt which has been hidden, and then gladly and willingly choose to hand it over to the Holy Spirit, who has an ability to heal your mind in ways that none of us have the power to do so. But the Holy Spirit's function in this world is to help us heal this hidden guilt. Sandra?
Well, is the guilt really hidden? Because don't we project it onto others?
It is, especially if you're in the course, you become more and more aware of it. But Sandra, you know the role of denial that people have. Denial is a defense mechanism that tries to keep it hidden and outwardly deny what the cause of the source is. And there are many other defensive mechanisms, dozen of them, that seek to keep it asleep. But in this program, we go right for it. Matter of fact, this is why you can be sure Course of Miracles is not a spiritual bypass. We are looking to awaken the sleeping guilt and let it go. It can only be let go if you recognize it's where it's at, where it's coming from. It's not coming from out there, but it's coming from in here, and then choosing to let it go. So miracle workers tend to be very conscious of, increasingly so with practice, that I'm responsible for the content of my own thinking and feeling. Okay, so all this can play out in any relationship under any circumstances. We are talking about the example of when someone believes in magic thoughts, but it need not be those symptoms, those specifics. In any conflicted situation, there still remains sleeping guilt, which has not been let go, and a tendency to, once that gets triggered and stirred, the entire separation drama replays out, and the thoughts and feelings that stem from that can get very ugly. As it says, and now there is no hope. The guilt, the ego would have you believe that once all this is stirred up, there is no healing is possible. There is no hope. Kill or be killed, for here alone is their choice. Beyond this, there is none. And what can be done? All right. So we're not avoiding that dark cave.
Into this hopeless situation, God sends his teachers. They bring the light of hope from God himself. There is a way in which escape is possible. It can be learned and taught, but it requires patience and abundant willingness. Given that, the lesson's manifest simplicity stands out like an intense white light against a black horizon, for such it is. If anger comes from an interpretation and not a fact, it is never justified. Once this is even dimly grasped, the way is open. Now it is possible to take the next step. The interpretation can be changed at last. Magic thoughts need not lead to condemnation, for they do not really have the power to give rise to guilt. And so they can be overlooked and thus forgotten in the truest sense.
So there's been a few references to interpretation. I think I didn't really point it out clearly enough before. But what we mean, all perception is a form of interpretation. It's a form of categorizing what happens by putting it into one of two categories, either illusions or the truth, either fear or love, either guilt or innocence. It's always, we talked about the sorting out process in previous sessions. And so one interprets. There's nothing in and of itself bad about interpretation because it stems naturally from perception. But there is false perception and false interpretation and true perception and true interpretations. And therein is where the error is usually made of which of those two one engages in. And so, what is the way out? So we're talking about this dark place where we have judged another person as not being worthy of our love because of their mistaken understanding of something, not being worthy of our time or our effort. This is where the teachers of God are called to. If not the teachers of God, then who can bring hope into such a situation? There is a way in which escape from playing out the separation all over again is possible. And that way can be learned and it can be taught, but the practitioners must be patient and willing to learn. As we read earlier, for most people, it's a slow and gradual transition from judgments of the ego to following the judgments and guidance of the Holy Spirit for most people. Given that, the truth, however, is very simple. It's not complex. It's what takes time is our willingness to relinquish little self-judgment. And once, so the key points here, if anger comes from an interpretation and not a fact, anger is never justified. We're not saying that the impulse to oppose the other person, it might not pass over your mind, for the ego always speaks first. We are saying that when that impulse passes, you don't buy into it. You don't believe in it. You question it. Once this is done, even dimly grasped, there is a possibility for an alternative choice where it's possible to take the next step, because it just means that the initial interpretation was one that dismissed the other person in some way, inferred something less of them, but that interpretation can be changed. This is what forgiveness does. I'm willing to let go of my interpretation to be guided by a higher voice. And so the initial impulse to be upset with someone can be overlooked and thus forgotten in the truest sense. This is where falling in love with the Holy Spirit's guidance is the best advice I can give you, where you truly want the Holy Spirit's interpretation and not to replay out those statements that were seen just a moment ago where all hope was lost. You truly desire to follow the path of light with your whole heart. It becomes easy then, because you've decided in advance, I want to pursue a path of healing. And so the old interpretation of the ego can easily be overlooked and forgotten.
Madness but seems terrible. In truth, it has no power to make anything. Like the magic which becomes its servant, it neither attacks nor protects. To see it and to recognize its thought system is to look on nothing. Can nothing give rise to anger? Hardly so. Remember then, teacher of God, that anger recognizes a reality that is not there. Yet is the anger certain witness that you do believe in it as fact. Now is escape impossible until you see you have responded to your own interpretation, which you have projected on an outside world. Let this grim sword be taken from you now. There is no death. This sword does not exist. The fear of God is causeless, but his love is cause of everything beyond all fear, and thus forever real and always true.
So I emphasize frequently both the science and the art of healing. The science of healing, I maintain, can be taught in settings such as this, where you can grasp what the Holy Spirit teaches about magic versus the truth. You can begin to grasp the difference in the thoughts and feelings that emerge from magical separation thought system versus thought system of healing and forgiveness. You can understand those things. And then you go out in your life and you have encounters where you have to apply those things. And now it's no longer theory. Now it's person standing in front of you, and the thoughts and feelings are arising within you in that moment. What remember then, teacher of God, that any dark thoughts, any critical thoughts, dismissive, disdain, or believing anything less than about the person standing in front of you is to emphasize a ego thought system. It's a witness that, and if you entertain those thoughts, that's evidence that you believe they are true. And once you invest the power of your mind in those beliefs, it says now is escape impossible until you see that you've made a mistake by responding to your own mistaken interpretation, which resides with that sleeping guilt. You responded to your own interpretation based upon hidden guilt and then projected it outward onto the individual in front of you. Let this grim sword be taken from you. And there's a subtlety here in the practice. What are we to do? Let's say this actually happens. For the first thought that comes to mind is one of, who is this person? What are they talking about? This person is really confused. Get me out of here. might be the first thought, or some such matter is the first thought that comes to you. And then, because you're practicing your program, you recognize the nature of that kind of response. And you realize that that's a weapon of judgment that is there, and you withdraw your belief and faith in that judgment. Then you realize, like Sandra said earlier, I really don't know what salvation is, but I know who I can turn to for help. So you turn to the Holy Spirit there and say, what is it that you would have me say? And what would you have me do in this moment? This brings you into the presence. So it means you don't have a plan, but you're willing to be guided. And the subtle part of it is the thought that first came, that referred to in the previous paragraph, so that thought can be overlooked and thus forgotten in the truest sense. That thought is just viewed as meaningless nothing. There's no more to be said about it. It was a temporary, mistaken impulse based on sleeping guilt, and we're not going to have any more to do with it. We're going to let it go. And instead, invest our entire attention on listening to what the Holy Spirit would have us say and what she would have us do. That art of doing that, in practicing these principles in all your affairs and all the moments that arise when you encounter people, it really doesn't matter the story, the context, or the form that it may be taken. There are no situations that are more difficult to heal than any other, but it does take a recognition on your part that that initial interpretation need not be reinforced. You can choose to let it go and then seek guidance from the Holy Spirit. Learning that art is, I don't know how to teach that other than to say your life is the practice field. Your every day, your every week, opportunities will arise for you to practice. Perfection is not expected or required. What is asked for is that you continue to progress forward in the right direction, and the rest will take care of itself. Tisha?
Yeah, what you just said really resonates with me. Being new to this work, I think I'm at the place where my awareness is that there is no situation too small to bring the Holy Spirit into. And that's sort of where I've been living right now with this work, is that I'm just being aware of the things that I choose to consciously invite the Holy Spirit into, and then the things that I will sort of just kind of unconsciously handle on my own and just sort of be on autopilot about. So for me, it's like snapping out of autopilot, just going about my day and trying to put the Holy Spirit before me in all of my interactions, or as many as I can remember to invite the Holy Spirit into.
Yes. Yeah, Atisha said there's no situation that's too small to invite the Holy Spirit into, and that's so true. I learned that lesson from someone. They said they were a Franciscan, which is I believe, a Catholic order of belief systems, that they would talk in terms of spirituality instead of raising the bar and doing greater and greater things, that they would lower the bar and try to bring their spirit, the Holy Spirit, into every little situation that might occur. Like we're doing the dishes, for instance. I don't know, things that would seemingly be too small or insignificant to ask to be happy and be enlightened by. But they believed in lowering the bar so that they could practice these principles in all their affairs. And I never forgot that message, because I knew it at that time that that was true for me, is if there's every situation is an opportunity, is a lesson God would have us learn. So thank you for that reminder, Atisha. Sandra?
Yeah, I'm one who lowered the bar because I studied this book for 7 years before I even thought to call on the Holy Spirit. But once I knew, once I really got it, that that was a true instruction, that I had to call on the Holy Spirit. Anytime I had any, I could be anxious because I couldn't start the lawnmower. And I would call on Holy Spirit and just ask Holy Spirit to be here with me. And then the lawnmower would start. But I just, for me, calling on the Holy Spirit, it was starting a new habit. So every time I judged, I had to call on the Holy Spirit. And I knew when I was judging because my body would contract. I felt it. So I had to call on the Holy Spirit and ask to be shown the truth. And now it's a habit.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's where we want to be, as it becomes our new default mode. Yeah, thank you. I have run my gamut of time allocation here, so I thank you for your patience. Atisha, thank you for substituting today on reading. So appreciate that. So appreciate each of you. These are profound lessons in truth. And I know that you will use your day and your week as an opportunity to do your best. I've been learning recently that no one can ask you to do any better than your best. So, and it doesn't mean that we are perfect at it. We make mistakes and then we get back up to doing our best once again. And so I honor the divinity that leads you from within. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you for reading, Atisha.
Namaste. Thanks, everybody.
Namaste,
Thanks.
everyone.
Namaste. Thanks, Atisha. Love you all. Bye.
Peace and love.
Good night.
Everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
You're welcome.